Thanks for coming to the house, man.
Yeah.
How are you?
Pleasure. I would sneak in here when you're not around anyway. So.
As you should. Come see shows.
It's a beautiful place, yeah.
It's become a nice little home for music.
Yeah.
In a way. Tell me about the new record.
New record is a big a scream of frustration against, this shit that's gone down in the last couple of years politically. I used to write tons of political songs in the 80s and stuff like that. That was kind of my, coming up with The Clash and U2 and stuff like that, getting politicized with music. And then all through the 90s, I kind of pulled it back to sort of more personal stories and sort of felt like, I found my vibe here at my rhythm. And then realized I had just been pushing that kind of stuff down. And over the last 2 years, just getting angry again and finding an outlet for that political anger. So it's kind of been poured into this record. There's 14 songs on it. Right. I had to fight a little bit for that, just to get, a double vinyl situation happening.
Right.
But, and they're kind of equally divided by songs, big political songs, and then sort of personal songs about people who are kind of uncomfortable in their skin, partially because of the systems that we live in and how toxic they are,
Is it, why this way? Why with this band? Because you can do this on your own. So why was this the right form for these songs to come out?
Well, it's funny because that having enough distance to have made solo records and records with my other bands and Lowest to the Low, they've sort of like the sand has sifted through the sieve and they've fallen into their categories, and the Low seems to be still in our early 50s, the pissy brats that want to, that the wheels come off sometimes and that want to sort of kick it over, right? So that's where it seems to feel at home, that kind of rage.
Yeah, I loved the last record. I loved how it felt. I loved how it sounded.
Yeah.
And I wondered if you, at some point, because I know you're obviously a very interesting artist and a very interesting writer, how you take what you've done with these same guys, more or less, and shift it, alter it, progress it. Is it more than just lyrics? Are you trying to find different feelings and different sounds?
Yeah, for sure.
For a new Low record?
For sure, because I think the last one, was, I've said this before, but being a songwriter, like I feel like there's just a random spewing of ideas for a year. And then it's only when I'm sequencing the record, I'm in the mastering suite or whatever, sequencing the record, and I'm realizing, this word comes up a lot this year, and that word comes up a lot this year. And so the last one, Do the Right Now, was all about my frustration with sort of how the slaves we are to technology and, and phones and devices. And it was like learning to be back to present in our lives in the moment, So that's what that whole record seemed to be about. And I don't know if it has a sonic fingerprint of that, but that was in our minds when we were making it. And then this one, was more about, hey, we need to look to the future and how we create a civilization where Brett Kavanaugh can't roll back women's rights for the next 2 generations illegally and sort of non-democratically, And so that's what these songs were about, and that's clearly a bit more of a spotlight looking forward. And, and then I was looking back to the influences that fit that, The Clash and Public Enemy, and, so those sounds, there's some Latin percussion going on in this record, there's a lot more horns going on in this record, that's kind of, those rally cries and those, Sandinista references. And
Mitch McConnell is going to go down as the worst, maybe, because Mitch is the one that stopped Obama from appointing a judge, even though I think Obama showed real failure in leadership because he could have fucking done it. Sure. And Obama, I think, really weakened out at that moment. But Mitch McConnell is the orchestrator of this whole thing.
Yeah.
And even if he disagrees with President Trump, he has blindly gone ahead anyway with these things. And you've been writing about the human condition for a long time and how we relate to each other and values. Have you seen trends? Have you seen changes? Does anything surprise you?
Well, believe it or not, yeah, things can still surprise me. I mean, I'm pretty inured to the idea that this whole right wing, it's not a new thing. I was fighting it in the 80s. We were egging Ernst Undel's house in the 80s and, fighting skinhead punks at our shows and stuff like that. Right. So that's always been there. And then
bless you for doing that.
Oh, well, you're welcome. But then, it sort of kind of seemed to get underground again, and it wasn't a mainstream thing at all. And now the fact that it's coming back to be a mainstream thing, just reinforces that idea that these things are not, progress isn't an evolution. It's not like we're just getting better and better and more humane. It's like, if you turn your back, you close your eyes for a second, all these things can come back. Mm-hmm. And it's a constant vigilance and a constant fight for it. So, yeah, I mean, it was a great moment. I took my partner for 50th birthday. We went to the New Yorker Festival, and night to night, the first night we had David Hogg, activist from the Parkland shooting, talking about, and the whole crux of it was, we got to get kids voting. We got to get kids, changing things. We got to get kids voting. And I sort of am on the fence about what voting can do and how much of a swindle it is, and using the master's tools to change the system. And the next night was Boots Riley, who was having none of that. He's like, voting's a swindle, man. Voting's for chumps. And then he laid out his program as to why he thought voting was for chumps. And it's like, I'm naturally wired to follow Boots's way. But, there's an awful lot of stuff going on. All the women that were elected for in the midterms, and, just hearing American politicians talk about democratic socialism is a bracing thing. It's like, so there you go. So I don't want to say that Donald Trump may have been a good thing, but I know that he's pissed a lot of people off and gotten people angry again, including, and I'll come back to the record, like, I was writing about my neighborhood, and now I'm writing about my neighborhood rising up and taking, helping other people kick it over in other neighborhoods.
How does that feel for you? How does it feel to have that?
Good, because, I have to say, it was like, I feel like I was pushing it down. Another guy who's like this is John Sampson from the Weaker Thans. Mm-hmm. He and I would talk about, we come from different parts of the left in the past, but we both were very active in our earlier lives, and then found that we were banging our heads up against something, and we kind of, not turned inward, but like sort of thought, maybe we have to work on the ground. Maybe we have to work from a personal level more than a macro level. And we both did that, but we also felt, both in lots of conversations I've had with him, felt frustrated about how impotent you feel doing that, even though, it's good work. And it's, of course,
it's meaningful.
Building humanity with each other is the building blocks to do the bigger work anyway. But it's still, we felt like it's not enough, and we should be, not silly enough maybe to think that our music alone is going to change the world, but like, for sure, let's have it be an arrow in the quiver, And
it's how I became politicized, is how you became politicized, was a record came out.
Yeah.
When you're, I'm sure there's more to it. What else was happening in your life aside from music when you were a kid that was doing this? Well, I got
politicized really early, like 15, 16 years old in high school with, the fear of world nuclear war was a big deal for us, in high school. So that got me politicized, and I started to suss it out pretty quickly, and I got pretty far left into the communist movement, into the Trotskyist movement, and that's where my bread seemed to be buttered. That made sense to me. The socialism made sense to me, and it was, and but I of course grew up with the Beatles and the Knack and Queen and everything. So I loved music as well. But it wasn't till I went to see the Clash at Maple Leaf Gardens, and it was at Maple Leaf Gardens. I went to see the Clash, and it was like I saw, wow, you can really. They've found a way to meld it. They don't have to be separate issues. And people in the left that I was working with who got very sanctimonious and would tell me every now and then, Dylan had to choose between the Socialist Workers' Party and being a pop star. They would kind of like guilt trip me that I had this desire to be this other thing too, right? And I guess clearly at that point it was like, well, see you guys later. And I went and became a musician,
I'm noticing on social media now, for better or for worse, a lot of the people I know who've been really active in the left-wing circles are equally as tired with the abuse they're getting from the left than they are from the right. And I could see it. The rage is building that the people on... Because the left isn't a monolith, right? As you suggested. It's not one thing, but it's a real fucking problem to try to get this to go.
Well, the biggest problem is that the left isn't a monolith and the right tends to be. It's that Republicans tend to be more organized and on point than Democrats do. Fascists seem to be much more single-minded than the left because, most of the human tragedies in the 20th century were that the left couldn't get its shit together to stop infighting enough. Yeah. Arguably the World War II could have been avoided had the leftists in Spain been more organized and not manipulated by Stalin and the Soviet Union. So I see it on the ground, even in small leftist groups in Toronto, there was a lot of backbiting, a lot of like cop baiting, you know.
Yeah.
If you don't like somebody's politics, you call them a cop.
Yeah.
It's like, really? You know, that's how we're going to change the world, by lying about each other? And
well, and they've proven they haven't changed the world. It hasn't
no,
changed.
I know. And it's
right?
that's one of the major reasons, I think, is that it's been ineffectual because of the failings of human beings to just get over themselves and get on with the job, you know?
Right. I love it when it sneaks into pop music, and because as much as Dylan had to choose, it was all over Dylan's work.
Yeah.
Both sides of it. Even when he was ultra political, he was still very human. Mm-hmm. And I think that if you want to reach 14-year-olds or 12-year-olds or 35-year-olds, who I'm more angry at, I'm not that upset about an 18-year-old who doesn't vote, because the fucking whole life is changing.
Yeah.
They don't know what they're feeling. It's the 34-year-olds who are disengaged that I look at and think, you're not helping. Mm-hmm. Right? And so when you're on stage now in this band, what does it feel? Do you feel like that 14-year-old again?
Oh, every day, yeah. I mean, I'm 54 years old, and I'm making this record. I feel like I'm 16 years old. Like nothing, zero has changed. Hopefully I'm a better songwriter, but other than that, like the energy of it hasn't changed, and I feel blessed to go to work every day because I feel like, and you know, I might be self-deluded, but I feel like my work is important, and it's important to the people who like it. You know, we're not by any means a household name, but you know, I look to people on a bigger scale that had the same problem, like the Clash. You know, one of my absolute templates of a band doing what, you know, making art and politics work. And they ran into all kinds of problems that they could have been a much bigger band than they were had they shut up and gone on with the business of being pop stars. But they didn't, you know, because that wasn't how they're wired. And
even David Lee Roth called them out, right?
Yeah,
at the festival.
And I got, you know, I mean, I, in spite of myself, love David Lee Roth for that.
As
know,
I
just
do
the way
too.
Can't take life so seriously, man.
It's rock and roll. When I interviewed Joe, Joe Strummer, he had told me that an artist's responsibility is to be of their time, and so many are focusing on being timeless. And he said, stop doing that. You know, history will determine if you're timeless.
Yeah.
But your job is to be of your time. Do you agree with that?
Oh, 100%. And because no matter what you think it is, you know, I mean, I'm a living example of, we made Shakespeare in My Butt, which is, you know, in the band we often like to call it the golden albatross, because it's sort of like, you know, we're blessed to have anybody give a shit about that record 25, 30 years later. But at the same time, you know, we feel like that's our first record, and we constantly have to climb out from under it, sort of to try and, we're going to, you know, every record I go, we're going to bury Shakespeare with this one, right? It's like I'm fighting with my own records. But, you know, if I look back on that record, and it's a very beloved record in our canon for our fans, I go, sonically it sounds terrible. All I hear is, you know, the high-voiced, naive little boys that made that record, and, you know, so I sort of bristle when I hear it, because I feel like it's naive and underachieved, and, you know,
right.
And none of that matters to anybody but me. You know, it seems, right?
Which is sort of liberating in a way, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Where you just have to, like, let them have that.
Yeah, because I just float above it, and I think, you know, there's a point you get to, especially as I was saying, I'm producing records and stuff like that too. There's a point where you can get so far into the business and the craft of making music that you forget that you listened all the songs that you loved and first heard. You heard it in a car that was passing by, or you heard it on your AM radio before school when it came, you know, when it woke you up and you were in a stupor. So you weren't listening to, hey, the tambourine needs to be up 2 dB, you know, like you were listening to the song, right? Which you should be.
Right.
So that's what I'm not doing when I'm listening to Shakespeare, going, that amp is really, should have been mic'd, you know,
well, it's just
from a foot away instead of
too close to you, right? That's the thing.
Yeah,
you know,
too in it, you know.
And was that a happy time in the band's life?
That was an ecstatic time in the band's life, partially because we're too stupid to know any better, and because we didn't know the weight of the job that we had undertaken. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, that I think was the thing that unraveled it pretty quickly, is that, you know, I hear more and more bands from that era saying, you know, nobody ever told us we could take a break, right? And so we were on the road 6 times a year going across Canada. And, you know, now I see bands, somebody took, you know, they took 2 years off so that he could go and finish his, you know, masters. Yeah, you know, it's like, it just sounds so sensible. And so, like, that's why they're not choking each other in the van, you know?
A lot of bands I've interviewed from that era told me the same thing. They're just like, we couldn't. That now when I interview bands, if I see an artist who looks like they're wavering, I tell them just like, fuck your label, fuck your manager, fuck everybody, go home.
Yeah.
Go home, or you're going to really regret what's going to happen next. Because it almost always goes badly.
Yeah.
You know, at this point.
go to Float Toronto and go in one of those deprivation tanks.
I go in at midnight.
Float for an hour.
Do you do those?
I do. I just did one. It was a totally whack
I love
thing.
it.
Yeah.
I do them at usually late at night, 11, midnight, because they're open late.
Yeah.
And it's really wild.
It's great, eh? And I thought, for the first 15 minutes, I thought, well, this is relaxing, but what is it, really? And then by 25 minutes in, I was kind of in a half state, like not asleep, not awake, and kind of like, wow. And it lasted I got to say, it was like taking acid or something. It lasted like 12 hours. I was in this kind of zen, floaty mood,
That's a good place to be.
Yeah, it's so great.
Let's tell me about the songs. We're going to premiere 3 songs, so we'll just talk about them and then we'll add them in. You got Midnight Marianne?
Yeah.
All right, tell us about this one.
Midnight Marianne. So my daughter went through some major stuff last year that was that included Sick Kids Hospital, and it was very traumatic for the whole family. And I was proud and excited by how we kind of closed ranks in a way the left doesn't do in our family, to support her and to support each other through it. And I think it was I would say the songs on the record that are about people struggling with themselves are all, we're all set off by this event in our lives last year. And so it's just really a plea to anybody who's feeling like far away from themselves or, not comfortable in their skin, that there's, we're here. There's a line, send that SOS and I'll receive it like a radio, and it's like, there are people out there waiting to hear you and help you and just be there, just to listen, not so much to tell you anything, but just to listen to what you have to say and hopefully help you back on course,
Because you can feel like you're really alone out there.
Yeah, and I mean, it's easy to, like, I often say, like, I feel like I'm on crazy pills most days because I read things and I see things. I'm like, people couldn't possibly want that en masse, could they? Like there's no way we could want that. And so I feel like I'm on crack a lot of days, But I'm a very centered guy who really knows what he wants and stuff like that. So I have friends who are anxious and, I'm hearing these things about kids. I know a person who's an intake person at OCA and said that like 40%, 50% of the kids who become first-year art students are on some kind of meds. And I'm like, well, it is art school. But,
But I wonder is it how much of it need, how much does we live in this hyper-prescriptive doctor, big pharma culture, which I feel like there's fucking collusion between, not that medicine's bad, because sometimes it's needed.
Yeah.
But we're overprescribed.
For sure, yeah.
It's just...
And there's nefarious money-making at the one end of it, hijacking a simple desire for us to help each other, So
let's play that song.
Sure.
The Ballad of Late Era Capitalism. This could be one of the ones we were talking about.
Yeah. This is the maybe less graceful one. I just love, I often come up with sort of working titles and it's like, well, I'll tweak that title later. And that title, I wrote it down because I was like, that's what it is. And then I was like, that's a really unwieldy title. And then the more I was reading it to myself, the more I thought, that's an amazing title because it's so unwieldy. I think about like titles like Everyone's Got Something to Hide Except for Me and My Monkey. Right? They stick in your head because it's like, that's a ludicrous song title. Why would you call it that?
I think I heard Gord Downey say that when they released that song, The Inevitability of Death, they titled it that way because he wanted to hear a morning show DJ have to say, when we come back, the inevitability of death.
Yeah.
What's this specifically about?
Well, it's just me breaking down in 3 verses, my beefs with capitalism.
Right.
There's a verse about money. There's a verse about religion. And then there's a verse about state terror, sort of coercion and torture. And the word waterboarding. I think it's probably the only pop song written that has the word waterboarding in it.
Or let's play it. We'll talk about that. Walk me through the religion thing.
Well, the first line of that is 2 religions is 2 religions too much. And I don't mean to disrespect people who are religious because I think, well, again, going through the left, I would, people get very irritated if you start to say to them, Christianity and socialism are not super different,
Not at all.
And communism is not super different as it's been shown in the world so far to the Catholic Church in terms of like its abuses of power and its manipulation of a doctrine that was much healthier, and was never meant to be interpreted the way it's been interpreted in the world. It's been interpreted by people who failed the doctrines, maybe. So, I think when I was probably a 25-year-old atheist, I decided that I was going to read the Bible and read the Gospels and stuff like that, because I thought, I don't want to be the guy who's picketing, the Passion of the Christ, who's never seen it.
Right.
I want to know what I'm talking about. Right. And of course, there's the whole problem with the Old Testament and there's the New Testament. But I mean, there's a lot of beautiful, important poetry in there that is important to people. And the thing is, and it's completely disingenuous for people who can call themselves atheists like I do, and then quote the Bible left, right, and center in all the work I do, right? Because there's something in there that's important that we need to know, right? So it's not so much an attack on, it's an attack on organized religions.
Right.
Which is kind of like shooting fish in a barrel, I guess. But
you know what? They still sit at the center of power. And they are used as an excuse. They, as you know this, I'm not telling you anything you don't know. So that barrel is fucking filled with poison water.
Yeah.
And so why not? Why not? And people forget on our side too that Tommy Douglas was a preacher.
Yeah.
I get a lot of that. Like Tommy Douglas and socialism. Yeah, he was a preacher. This was his way of living the social gospel.
Yeah.
So it can't all be bad.
Yeah, well, and also as I get older, growing up as a snarly punk kid who goes, I'm an atheist, people who believe in God are stupid, that's where you start.
Yeah.
And then you slowly reverse engineer that and realize, no, they're not. Like some of the smartest people in the world believed in God, and who am I? And it's just trying to figure out what that means to people. My instinct is that what God means to people who didn't, what God means to people who grew up with their grandmothers and their, Zetas and everybody telling them what God is, can't help but have this sort of packaging and baggage around it. But they're still really kind of getting to something that I'm getting to, which is that it's important for us to take care of each other and understand each other's sufferings and do what we can do to alleviate that. We just wrap it in different, I wrap it in socialism, they wrap it in Christianity. Right. There's somewhere in there, again, I keep finding somewhere in there, there's a place we can work together, to fight the people who don't give a shit about any of that,
It's one of the best parts about getting older is, I like the way you phrase it, reverse engineering, because the other way I've heard it described is calling yourself on your bullshit, which we all have to do. And a lot of people I've interviewed, to get to a certain age, they're like, yeah, fuck, I've learned about a bunch since then.
Yeah.
And it's okay to be honest, isn't it, about the fact that you know more or better or differently, isn't it?
Yeah.
And we live in this strange culture now where no one's allowed to grow. A mistake from 10 years ago, forget it. I'm not talking about criminal mistakes. They're different.
Right.
I'm talking about a mistake of a point of view.
Sure, yeah.
People aren't, we're in this strange era where it's very challenging for people to actually grow. And they get pushed into a little box. And I don't think we're doing ourselves any favors on a society level by treating people like that.
No, and we're encouraged now to kind of double down on everything.
Yeah.
And we're encouraged on both sides of the fence to be not civil with each other, And I was going down some YouTube rabbit hole late at night, and I was watching something that led to John and Yoko on the Dick Cavett Show, which led to something else, which led to Woody Allen and William F. Buckley Jr. on some talk show in the 60s. And I was rubbing my hands well, this is going to be good. It was the most polite, hashing out of differing opinions, both of them going, you're so wrong, it's not funny, but with such an adorable sense of respect for each other. You're a smart person, I'm a smart person, we totally disagree on this. Right. Neither of us are murdering people.
Right.
Let's talk about it, And Lois and Loa being a band that has a lot of American fans, I just always assume, I think Kurt Cobain sort of suffered from this too. You just assume everybody gets everything you're doing and they're probably like you and your buddies. Yeah. And they're not, some people just dig the energy of the music. And so I started to engage with some people on Facebook about when Trump became president. And I think the first one was somebody said, what are all these women marching about anyway? What are they complaining about, right? And I was like, I think they're complaining about this,
right.
And my friends would go, you can't engage with everybody on Facebook,
It's hard.
Yeah, it's hard. But what I found from it was that at least, and it's a different position with me because maybe I have a little bit of, not authority of opinion, but authority to bring people to a table because they already like my music.
Right.
And they don't really want to, like somebody said, oh, I just got bitch slapped by my favorite singer.
Yeah.
And it's like not about that, but it's about bringing people. And my feeds have been pretty civil, you know? If it gets crazy or if somebody's way out there, that I shut them down.
Right.
Or, you know, at a certain point after enough threads, I go, okay, people, I'm switching the lights off.
Time
Get
to go
off my
home.
feed. It's time to go home. But I found that very productive, you know, like, and not so much even for me and whoever I started with, but the people who jump on, you know. There's been a lot of actual discourse. And, you know, because we have lots of Republican fans in the States, and it's like some of them are incredibly intelligent people, and I just disagree with them about economics, you know?
Right, yeah, because not all Republicans, not all conservatives are like Mike Pence.
No, for
Many
sure.
are, of course, but not all.
I would have to think like very few of them are like Mike Pence because he's a real extreme part of that party, I think, you know?
He's the vice president.
No, I know. Of course. Well, let's not even talk about the president. But I mean, you know, on the ground, the Republicans I meet on the ground, sure, there's things I don't like about it. And there's, you know, and I don't want to candy coat the fact that there's some maybe toxic viewpoints sometimes. But, you know, I probably have toxic viewpoints I don't even recognize as toxic viewpoints.
For sure. And that's the thing about unpacking our own bias, right, is figuring out how we have to be allowed to find a way. I mean, look, I know that if you watch a Woody Allen clip, there's somebody right now tweeting about the fact that you watched the Woody Allen clip.
Yeah.
Right? And it's as if we can't read or listen to anything done by people who've done things we don't like. I tend to be around people who I don't agree with a lot because I want to learn.
Yeah.
Not learn how to be like them, but understand them. If you want to make change, I think you got to understand the people who you disagree with, don't you?
Sure.
And well, music's been a big part of that for me. I've struggled with. I don't hate Kid Rock. So if I hear Kid Rock's lyrics, I'm like, fuck, go for it, buddy.
Yeah.
You know, even though I disagree with them on a lot of levels. Sure. But have you ever found yourself connected to an artist who you just disagree with, aside from David Lee Roth?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, you know, it gets as bold faces as I said. You know, I can remember a show we did when I was in a band called Social Insecurity with David, who's the drummer in Lowest of the Low. We were in this band, and it was a Marxist punk rock band, straight edge band, and we were dragging out a lot of people. So the promoters, who didn't really have any political nuance whatsoever, would put us, you know, often with mods and then with skinheads, and not sharp skinheads, but, you know, like racist skinheads, right? So we wound up doing the show in the basement of the Latvian Center on College Street near Sneaky's. And that erupted into like chair fights. Somebody got stabbed at the show, and it was because skins and leftist punks going at it. And we're on the stage, and, you know, I loved how Dave Kiner, I don't know if you know him, but he was in a band called The Immediate. They were the mod band on the bill, and we were like back to back mods and punk, you know, mods and Marxists back to back. Let's go, man! Like, you know, and just defending ourselves and making sure our people were okay in there. But
sharping skinheads against racial prejudice. It's amazing that we used to live in a city where Sharp and the Guardian Angels used to walk around.
Yeah,
just the fact that there were these groups of people that used to walk around. The city has changed so dramatically, hasn't it?
Yeah.
And so much of your musical career here has been the city and the haunts and what they mean to you.
Right.
When you look back, I don't know if you've left Toronto for any long stretches recently. When you come back, what do you see here? I'm talking about like culturally and artistically.
Yeah. Well, it's amazing because it's an explosion of all the best and worst, you know? Like obviously the music scene is very vibrant and has been unleashed in a way that it was getting unleashed for us in the 70s and then in the 80s, and then in the 90s we had that little window with you guys on the edge and stuff like that, and new music and stuff like that, where stuff could happen for a little indie band that can't happen for a little indie band anymore. People don't realize when they talk about the Six now, how into that late 80s, early 90s, most Canadian music didn't get any attention. Yeah. And CanCon had a huge impact on it. But you're right, at the edge, like I came in midway into that, but we cared deeply about these bands. Yeah. And you were a part of the reason why, you know, you and Bare Naked Ladies and other bands there, of course, you know, out west you had, you know, Eric's Trip, out east, there were bands coming. But I also felt like those bands and you guys were coming at a time when what was happening politically, but also what was happening in America, it lined up. Sure. Where if you guys had tried to be hair metal bands, it would have seemed a bit strange. Yeah, a hair metal band from Newmarket, you know, whomever. But when that music of the youth had a certain sound, it was like a perfect opportunity for Canadian bands to kind of dive into that. Well, that thing where all the ducks are in a row, right? Because Alan Cross, we were talking to him about it, and I said, you know, the thing I remember about that is there was something happening there with the edge and just the people that were there, all you guys that believed in doing that and weren't just like career DJs. It was like people who love music. Yeah. And I said, like 5 minutes before that happened, it was impossible. 5 minutes after it happened, it was impossible. But there was a little window there. Yeah. And I always say this not to undermine the fact that we were super hardworking and had some talent, but we also had a beautiful opportunity, and we jammed our foot in that door, because I say this a lot. I know lots of bands nowadays who have it way more together than we had it, and have great music, and they have their show together, and they can't get an agent, or they can't, there's no way they're going to get, or they're unlikely to get on Indie 88,
right.
The same way that we were able to get, and even just little things like, them picking up Rosie and Gray, which I think it's a minute and something before anybody sings anything.
Yeah.
And our manager at the time going, we got to cut that intro in half. And the band was so unmanageable at that time. It was like everything was just like 8 middle fingers would go up, Fuck you, this is what it sounds like, man. Yeah. And then it got reinforced, right? By the fact that you guys made it happen. So maybe there's some damage. Maybe I'm still unlearning some of the enabling that you guys did back in the day.
But maybe it's that everybody's only supposed to have a window, and then the rest of their life they can still be as important and still reach lots of people. But there's a picture over your shoulder of Robert Plant when he was here, and when I interviewed him, he told me that when Zeppelin ended, he said, I was 32. Got the rest of my life ahead of me. And he's like, I honestly, even money aside, I didn't even know what I was supposed to do anymore.
Yeah.
And he's never tried to get Zeppelin back. He just went on to did other shit.
Yeah.
And maybe there's just we're supposed to have a window.
Yeah, sure.
And the lessons you learn then are the ones you're supposed to carry on. For example, like be unmanageable when it comes to the integrity of your art. That seems like a good way to be unmanageable.
Yes, yeah, for sure. But it's peculiar to music, I think, because if you were a visual artist or if you were a fiction writer, nobody would expect you to get less important or less good at what you do as you got older. They would think you probably are going to get better at, and your best work's probably going to be in your middle age or your, so it is weirdly, I think it's weirdly tied to the origins of the way we market music, as a teenage thing, right?
Yeah.
And even now I've heard people talk about how that the demographic, still the teen and young adult demographic, is still the one you want, the one you're searching for. And people are like, they don't have any money. Like, it's even weird from a capitalist standpoint that that's the demographic you're skewing toward, because they don't really have money to buy your product,
Right. Well, I mean, the entire evolution of hip-hop has been taken out of the hands of the industry because a bunch of kids who couldn't break through all took the same beat, the same thing, even used some of the same lyrics, but just had an Instagram following and a SoundCloud following. And now they're making a ton of cash, but it's because fucking sponsors are giving them money.
Right.
It's just changed so dramatically.
Yeah.
But John Prine's last record was incredible, I thought.
Yeah.
And, he just...
Well, that's the thing is that it's, you can't kill it because it's something that we need on a cellular level. Like it's not like a, it's not like a lightsaber app. It's like, this is stuff that feeds our soul.
Yeah.
So no matter where, you're never going to quelch it. Even if the industry isn't built well for it right now, it'll be happening in the pockets, and people will find it because they need to.
Tell me about the Barricade.
Oh, the Barricade's fun because it's one that I wrote. I started writing it, and it was like organically became this thing. I started singing it like Dylan, and it became this thing where I was like, okay, cool, I got this tune, and I'm gonna start a website called the Lost Dylan Protest Project, which was like, we need protest songs, people, and Bob's not going to write them. So I sent the demo to the band and just said, hey, I wrote this tune. And for the first pushback was sort of like, why are you singing like that? What's wrong with you? And I was like, yeah, we'll ignore that. I'm like, this is where it started, as it was going to be a Dylan thing. And I was going to challenge people actually to sing like Dylan and do this protest song thing. But I said, it's not about that. Just listen to the song.
That's a great idea, by the way.
And then, it may be still something I will do. But then I hijacked the tune because it was like this scenario where I got to the last verse, and the last verse was a bit contentious inside the band because we're working with David Bottrell at producing, and we can talk about that in a sec. But he and a couple of guys in the band took a little bit of umbrage at there's a line, you can vote with your head, you can vote with your heart. Some people vote with their heads, some vote with their hearts, some vote with the end of their dicks. You can vote with a ballot, you can vote with your wallet, but it's always a vote for the pricks. So let me tell you this for free, my next vote's with a brick. from somewhere beyond the barricade. So they took umbrage at the idea of the implied violence of that, or like, the anti-voting aspect of it or whatever. And so we hashed it back and forth. This is why I know I'm in a beautiful Democratic band, because they were calling me on what they thought was my bullshit.
Right.
We had a discussion about it, kicked it back and forth. And at a certain point I said, well, look, as you say, I do have I have a solo outlet for it and stuff like that. And I said, I don't want anybody singing something every night that they feel completely doesn't represent them. I said, if it's blowback you're worried about, I'm the singer and the songwriter, so I'm going to have to deal with it, right? Not you guys. But anyway, so at a certain point, it was actually Steve Kane, the president of Warner, who were on, ironically, when we come back to the Lowe's contentious, dealings with he was like, that song's got to be on the record.
Well, because he would love that lyric too.
Yeah.
He would love that lyric.
Yeah, and we had a great, like when we signed for 2 records with them, he said, can you write me a little blurb, just saying that the Lowe's joined the Warner family and everything. And so I sent him a thing that said, after 27 contentious years of bloody battle with the music labels, Lowest of the Low has accepted Warner's unconditional surrender. And so, to his credit, he loved it, right? Yeah. I sent it as a joke because I thought, well, I'll write the real one, but he'll get a kick out of this. So he laughed about it and he was like, no, we got to use this, right? And he's like, I like this idea. Like, you guys are indie freedom fighters and we're kind of, we'll keep that thing going, right?
Well, he's the only punk rock president of the labels that I know.
Yeah.
Right?
So weirdly enough, he fought for the Barricade to be on the record. And it was so, it's so of a piece with the theme of the whole thing, the record being called Agit Pop, that everybody kind of got over it and they were like, yeah, cool, no, no problems. And
I think the record label is, this is so different now today that it's not, the reasons to not sign with them today are not the same as they would have been 25 years ago. Mm-hmm. It's just it's a whole different world now, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. I think the only reasons not to sign with the label today is to go like, what's a label?
Which people do think, for sure.
Which people do think. And you go through the process and even have people at Warner, like Steve will even go to me like, yeah, it's a different world,
Totally.
Because it is really
You made requests as well. I want to get your requests. You have some songs you want to play. But talk about working with Dave Bottrell.
Working with Dave Bottrell has been great. We were kicking around a few, like as I say, I produce records and we've produced the last couple ourselves or in conjunction with Joe Dunphy at Revolution, stuff like that. So that was one route. That was the less costly route that we thought we might take. And then it was like, I just felt we're on a major label right now. This album of any album in a long time for me feels like it's very timely with what's going on. The band feels like we're firing on all cylinders. Let's do this right. Let's get somebody, to be I want to just be a machine. I want to be a singer and a guitar player. And we're too opinionated not to make comments anyway. But so we brought him in and had a meeting with him. And I had talked to a couple other producers and we talked about, there was one, we were talking about Road Stories and he was talking about covering somebody in the band's face with shave cream and then clipping off his pubic hairs and sticking them in the shaving cream. And we had similar, bored boy Road Stories. And it was like, we were getting along with him and everything. But then when we met David Bottrell, it was like within 20 minutes, we were talking about the Leafs and then talking about the state of the world and politics and stuff like that. And I was like, this feels like it might be the better fit than the pubic hair guy.
I think so. I definitely think so. Okay, so you have we sent us a couple, which is cool. Let's play a few of these ones. Sleaford Mods.
Yeah.
First time I heard it, I was just like, there it is.
Yeah.
That's the band the world needs right now.
Right.
How do you, so that's when you requested Sleaford.
Yeah. I stumbled across it as well, and I was like, what is going on? Like, who the hell are these guys? Like, just sort of like weirdly unlikely middle-aged, mad Northern Englanders.
Yeah.
And then heard the music, and once I could sort of discern what the hell he was saying, because the accent is very thick. Just, the real, I feel like it's in a way, it's very modern, but in a way it's a throwback to the Pistols. It's a throwback to all the sort of, the undertones, like just people living haplessly in places that aren't super glossy. And, he's just telling the world about where he comes from. And I love the DJ music making guy who just makes the music. And then when they play live, he just presses play on and this sways with a beer. And I was like, hey, how did these guys become, what they are? And I just adore them. I think they're so...
It's so working class. I love it.
Yeah.
Tell us the stories, right? What else do you want to hear?
And the thing about those guys too is I'm sort of like, I mean, the Ramones made a lot of records that sounded the same, but I'm just thinking like, I wonder how much of a shelf life this has. But we'll find out.
We'll find out for sure. But again, they're of their time. As a guy who's worked in a lot of different parts of the music business, what did Lee Scratch Perry mean to you?
Oh, just he's one of those guys that is just like foundational. Just like without blowing it way out of proportion, I think a lot of things just couldn't be done if there had been no Lee Scratch Perry. And just, everything about any songs I hear from him just they go right past my brain. Like they go right into my body, and it's like, you can feel it. You can sense the rebellion in it. You can sense the creativity and the magic in it, that he just makes. And I mean, he burned his studio down because he was,
Yeah. He burned it down. It should be a museum.
Yeah.
He burned it down.
But no, he's burned it down. Yeah.
He's out of his mind.
He's out of his mind for sure.
Yeah.
And probably very dangerous, but
he grabbed a marker when he was up here. He sat where you sat and just drew all over the place. Took pieces of art here. He just decided to reimagine them and draw all over it. And you're like, who's going to stop an 84-year-old Lee Scratch Perry out of his mind doing it? It is. Okay. So,
because the end of that story is, how did George die?
Yeah, that's right.
He took the marker off Lee Scratch Perry.
Oh, when we're not recording, I'll tell you what happened actually afterwards. Which Lee Scratch Perry, which Marley song do you want to hear?
There's I don't know if we'll find what I originally heard, but I think it was a demo of Small Axe.
Okay.
But the song Small Axe, as one of the things I just love about Bob Marley is the sort of, again, really he's talking about, is he talking about religion? Is he talking about revolution? It's always impossible to tell what he's, and I guess it gets hijacked by whatever, someone who's listening to whatever their intentions are with it. But, it's just so concise. And I just love the line, if you're a big tree, we are a small axe ready to cut you down, cut you down.
It's beautiful. We talked a lot about the Clash. Which Clash tune?
Clash tune.
You have Capital Radio here.
Oh, Capital Radio, yeah. I mean, that's the thing is I could just say all the records, just play all the records.
Even Cut the Crap?
All the records, and This Is England. But Capital Radio, for a couple of reasons, because it puts me right back to when I was railing about the radio industry before I got a chance to be in the club.
Right.
And I just love the screaming at the end, don't touch that dial, don't touch that dial, So that kind of, this is one thing I said to Dave Bottrell is he said, how do you see this record? And I said, well, the watermark for me with records like this is always London Calling, to strike that line where it's like, it's quite produced with the horns and the percussion and everything. But everything sounds like they made it up on the spot, and I love that about Capital Radio, just Joe Strummer's ability to, whether it is really ad lib or not, to just make you believe that he thought that 5 seconds after he said it, maybe, I don't know,
We're doing a big 4-hour special on London Calling on our show, an anniversary of it.
Right.
What would your contribution to that be? Like, when you think about that record, the first time you heard it, what it meant to you?
Yeah, well, I would have to be here and go through every song and go, that saved my life, and that saved my life, and that saved my life. Yeah, I think it just, I hope my records don't come across as just kowtowing homages to the Clash, but I mean, it's so ingrained in my cells what those guys were about and how they make music. And it's just, the collage of styles. I mean, everybody talks about how they were forerunners of a lot of things. Mm-hmm. And I it's why I used to get into battles with people about the Pistols versus the Clash. And I was like, I love the Pistols, but the thing about the Pistols is it feels a little bit, maybe more modern now, like a little bit ironic and a little bit like a theater art project. And the Clash, as maybe embarrassingly genuine as Joe was at times, I prefer that. I think the future will be better if people are overly earnest.
I agree.
Than it will be if they're overly ironic.
I agree 100%, because irony can make you think, but earnest people go out there and actually change things.
Yeah.
In a really meaningful way. So what is your song on that record? If we had to pick the one, what song? When you say it saved your life, because I've heard that, I've felt that way.
Yeah.
How did it save your life?
Well, yeah, maybe it didn't save my life. It saved my future in terms of as an artist, because had I not heard that record, I think I wouldn't have understood how you can put the puzzle together in that way, how you can make people dance their asses off, sonically please the hell out of them with, cultural assessments and things you bring in from other cultures and make your own. That's the thing I love about those guys, as opposed to lots of people who, let's say, played reggae or played dub or whatever, white boys who played dub that didn't make it their own. I mean, the Clash always made it their own, and it wasn't
appropriation.
Yeah. I mean, people might argue that it was, but I mean, even if they did, I would say, well, then they did the best version of appropriation that there is, because, it really speaks to, I mean, the fact that, they would be lauded by Lee Scratch Perry and Bob Marley would write, Punky Reggae Party. Like, if the people who made that music, are saying bravo, then who the hell are we to talk about?
Agreed. You have an Amy Winehouse and a Billy Bragg request too.
Yeah, Billy Bragg's no brainer. I mean, Billy Bragg, I used to go see him every year, and I just left his shows feeling like I want to be the best intramural ringette player I could ever, like whatever it is you were doing, like you just leave there and go, I want to be the best at that. And I've told the story before about being on the road with him, opening for him, and every night, I've never particularly been cynical about the music industry, but let's say I had been, I would go out to the merch table and he would be there 20 minutes after his set every night. And there would be 200 people lined up, and he would talk to every single person. And I would go, yeah, well, that's, smart and whatever. But then I'd sidle up and I'd hang around, and I'd realize, I'd go like, Billy has to have assistants scouring the paper, because he's like, so that teacher strike in Aurelia, like he just knows about stuff there's no reason why he would know about. And I started calling him the Gordie Howe of socialism, because I remember, my dad would tell me that Gordie Howe would sign kids' autographs and they'd be flicking the lights off. Gordie, we got to go home. He's like, no, 3 more autographs. Billy was like that for anybody who lined up,
But he gets a lot of love for his political positions as well, but he's written a lot of songs that weren't political that are beautiful songs as well.
Well, in fact, that's why I love Billy the most. I on the road, he's got an anti-Trotskyist thing. He doesn't like Trotskyists, so, and he started calling me the Dirty Mick for some reason. So there was an Irish thing that I thought was kind of funny. He would be poking me in the ribs, and I'm like...
Different rules for different groups, I guess.
Yeah, like if the 16-year-old me could see into the future that Billy Bragg would be poking me in the ribs going, there's the dirty little Mick. But we would get into a little bit about politics. But what I really love about Billy is more of the love songs, the sort of soul, Motown-y kind of love songs, I think are his best work. Right. I love There's Power in Union and songs like that, but I really think his love songs are the...
Which one should we play? You got the Levi Stubbs.
Oh, well, Levi Stubbs, yeah. I guess Levi Stubbs' Tears would be, the Hey Jude of Billy Bragg, I think,
We'll play that one. And Amy Winehouse. Let's play Amy Winehouse.
Yeah, and Amy, because I'm a massive girl group fan, always have been, and just the vocal, the attitude.
Spice Girls girl group or
Ronettes.
Yeah, okay.
Shondells and Supremes and stuff. Like just the vibe of that. I love that sort of early soul stuff and Motown stuff and the girl group stuff especially. It just seems to have an understated attitude. Like there's attitude there, but it's not obvious snarling attitude. It's just those women got something to tell you, and you don't want to mess with them.
And their presence was everything.
Yeah,
it changed. Seeing the rock, like it changes people, changes culture when they took the stage.
Yeah, So that and then seeing Amy Winehouse do it, you could easily go, well, it's kind of like a glorified bar band version of, but then you hear Amy Winehouse singing and the Daptones playing and Mark Ronson's production. He's one of my favorite producers because of just the way he was able to make that a super current sounding record, but it's using timpani and strings and all the things they used in Motown, and stacks and stuff like that. So he's just, he's a magician too. But Amy's voice, just that thing where you go, I would tell my daughter Ruby when I went to see the Purple Rain tour, I said, there's 3 kinds of bands. I said, there's a band that you go see and they make you want to start a band. And then there's a band you go see that makes you want to go home and rehearse and just be the best band you can. And then there's Prince and the Revolution, when you go home and you go, I'm just going to quit and do something else because look what they're doing,
Right.
Sheila E. is jumping off the drum kit, throwing the sticks in the air, and he's grabbing them and jumping on the kit, and they don't seem to drop a beat. And it's like, my band has to work right up to the point of the show to get the songs down, right? Not to jump around. And so I find Amy Winehouse like that. She just opens her mouth, and it's like, well, yeah, I'm a singer too, I guess, but...
Thanks for coming in, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
A pleasure.
Lovely.
Thank you. Indeed.
I'm going to write on your house now.
You should.